You're listening to Finding Your Genius Zone with Dirk Nevelle. With the help of successful individuals across industries, Dirk breaks down the unknown parts of every vocation while highlighting the importance of finding a career where you can leverage your natural skills, passions, and interests. Now here's your host, Dirk Nevelle.
Hi, this is Dirk Nevelle. Welcome to my podcast. On with me today is Hummie Mann. Hummie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dirk. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Now, Hummie is a composer for movie scores, and he also teaches. And just a little backdrop on Hummie. I've actually never physically met him, but years ago, I got an email, and I don't know how I got on the list, but it was about a school for learning how to write movie scores. And I was very interested. But the problem was I didn't know how to read music, and it probably was a disqualifier. But the thing about Hummie is like this is one of those things that if I could do anything, I think it would be to be in this kind of world. I'm fascinated by music, scores specifically, and I can spend hours sitting outside by the fire just listening to music. It moves me in ways that very few things do. So I'm really excited, Hummie, to have you on. I guess maybe what I'll do is just throw it back at you, and people are coming in to learn a little bit about what you do. Maybe in your own words, if you're sitting on a plane and someone says, "Hey, Hummie, what is it you do?" Maybe you could give the audience a little color.
Sure. I had multiple careers in my life, which have been great. For about 24 years, I lived in Los Angeles, and I was working on scores for television and film, starting off as an orchestrator for other composers, conducting for other composers, orchestrating for other composers, eventually doing some what we used to call ghostwriting, now is called assistant composing, and ultimately becoming, getting work under my own banner, so to speak. Probably best known for my work with Mel Brooks. I scored Robin Hood Men in Tights and Dracula Dead and Loving It. For some of the younger people, I scored Thomas and the Magic Railroad. I've won 2 Emmy Awards for my work over the years, and last year was nominated for a Critics' Choice Award for the best documentary score for a film that I scored called The Automat. So I've been involved in the creative process of creating music for television and film for a long time. And currently I am also now a professor, and I teach film scoring at a program that I created, the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program, which is the music department of the Seattle Film Institute. And we're now entering our 13th year or 14th year of giving master's degrees to students who want to study the art and craft of film composition.
Thank you for that introduction. So some of my questions are going to be kind of elementary and dumb, but forgive me. I'm just kind of curious. Question. But one just kind of curious is, do you have a favorite composer? I mean, or a few? I'm just kind of curious if you have your own kind of style and niche, or are you attracted to someone, that you looked up to in the past, or do you just kind of do it your own way?
No, I think that I certainly grew up listening to film music and, have my heroes, which I've been very fortunate. When I lived in Los Angeles, I had a lot of opportunity of actually interacting and meeting some of these people. Jerry Goldsmith being one of them, who was a hero of mine, and who I actually got to work with once or twice. But one of the things that's interesting that you mentioned is the idea of, in film composition, film composers really need to be chameleons, because you're not really finding your voice, you're finding the voice of the film. And so you listen to things like John Williams, who did, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then he also did Catch Me If You Can, which is a completely different kind of score, or Accidental Tourist. Film composers have to look at the film and decide what is the right attitude, the right genre, the right way of approaching that film. And, most film composers like to do a lot of different things. I've been very fortunate to do, I did a film called Year of the Comet, which was a Celtic score. I did a film called Dracula Dead and Loving It, which was a Gothic dark score. Robin Hood Men in Tights was kind of a medieval, night score. Thomas and the Magic Railroad was was a children's film, and so that was a whole different kind of attitude. And I've done a lot of different types of genre scores, and I really enjoy doing that. In fact, I probably prefer that than doing the same kind of score over and over again. I like to explore new venues and new sounds and new instrumentation. And to me, when I'm teaching film scoring, I really talk about the idea of like, finding the voice of the movie. That's really what your job is.
So this is interesting. I never thought of it like that. So I would think my assumption is you had your style and then someone says, hey, this is a great movie for Hummie. But what you're kind of saying is you can switch gears and play on both fields. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a dark gothic comedy or a romance or whatever. Is the skill set typical? Like composers can kind of go from here to here to here, or do most composers kind of just stay in their lane?
Everybody's different. Some people specialize in one specific genre and style, and some people, like Year of the Comet, I'd never written a Celtic score or Celtic music before in my life. So, but it's the skill set is having the ability to go and listen to music of a certain genre and figure out what's going on. What is it that gives it its characteristic sound? It's the instrumentation, the harmonic language, all of that can be kind of mimicked. So even though Year of the Comet, I'm not a Celtic composer, has a very strong Celtic flavor. And so the idea is, having the skill set to be able to do that. But again, some composers, view it another way. They view it as, you want me, so you want my sound. I think that the actors and actresses that work, if you think about, actresses or actors that take on the different characteristics of different characters, that's exactly the same thing that a film composer should assign. At least that's my feeling. I think of like, Jerry did Chinatown and he did Basic Instinct and he did, Star Trek, and those are completely different kinds of scores. And so it's the capability of being able to write in a lot of genres and understand those genres, or be able to have the skills to understand those genres, even if it's not something you have in your back pocket.
Yeah. And did Jerry do Rudy?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that soundtrack.
Gorgeous score.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I know I'm gonna butcher the name, but I love Ennio. Is it Mara? So Cinema Paradiso is. I could listen to that all night long. It just gets me. And I think years ago that was one of the movies that like really started me thinking about this as a potential side hustle or just a passion. But
it's interesting you should mention that film, because that film, in my opinion, is one of the strongest melodic film scores ever written. He's just a fabulous melodist, and it's something that we have unfortunately gotten away from. And so there's a lot of scoring these days that's more ambient, percussive, in some ways, less identifiable. And they can work. You can write great film scores that work with the film, but that are not necessarily great music. And to me, people like Ennio, Jerry Goldsmith, John Williams, how many John Williams themes can you think of? You probably could think of like 20 just off the top of your head, because he's so strong a melodic and thematic composer. Whereas there are other composers who don't have that same skill set. I'll leave it at that.
No, I think I gravitate towards, The Mission, with Robert De Niro, The Scene. I don't know. It's just, so I have a lot of questions, and I'm thinking about how do I prioritize these when you are being introduced. Like, I don't know what that dating process is like, if it's a phone call and it's like, hey, Hummie, would you like to audition? Or is, hey, we want you to do this film? Or is it just making sure you're on the same page? Are you having to work with a producer or a director? Who typically are the titles that you have to interact with to get a deal?
Yeah, it's all over the map on some level. There some younger composers will do demos to suggest that this is an approach that I would go with. I don't do that. I'm pretty much hired based upon my reputation or people that I've already worked with. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, my career has kind of slowed down a bit since I no longer live in Los Angeles. But I did a documentary feature last year that got nominated for a Critics' Choice Award. So I'm happy to do work when it's there. The industry has changed a lot since I started. And one of the things that I was very fortunate to get to do is to work with a lot of large orchestras. So I scored a lot of films that I had 80, 90, 100 musicians. Um, a lot of lower budget films now are going fully electronic, which is a fine way to do it. I just don't, that's not my strong point. I mean, if I'm going to do an electronic score, I'll hire someone to help me do that, because I'm not really all that crazy about doing the programming and things of that sort. I have done some, and I've done scores that are combination scores. I scored the miniseries In Cold Blood with Anthony Edwards and Eric Roberts, and that was an electronic score with a lot of acoustic folk influences. So there was guitar, 12-string guitar, high-strung guitar, dobro, mandolin, and it made sense for that kind of film. So in other words, the vocabulary of the film made sense to the story.
So I get, again, a question that I'm thinking I know the answer, but you must have, to be good at what you do, does that mean that you have to have this wide skill set of understanding all the different instruments? Or, can you be a composer and just be someone who plays piano, or do you have to be fluent in all the different instruments?
Well, it's actually an interesting question. I think that the definition of a film composer has changed over the last 20 or 30 years. It used to be that most of the people who were coming into film music were educated, music composers who had studied theory and studied orchestration and studied harmony. And electronics have now made it, people who have wonderful musical ideas to put them down electronically with basically, hopefully they have great ears, and sometimes they do. Do I care if the Beatles know how to read music? No. Do I care if Paul Simon does? No. So there's the actual writing of music does not require an education. However, if what you're trying to do is get that music in front of 90 musicians so that they can perform it, then that's an education that's required. And so a lot of people, in fact, for a number of years, I did, and other people that I know do, they'll work with a composer who might be getting an opportunity to work in the field because of his great work as a pop or a rock artist. And so they want to hire that person to get that sound, but then that person has to hire someone who's an orchestrator who's educated in how to convert that stuff to notation for an orchestra to perform it. So it's kind of changed over the years what it is. There are composers out there who are doing great work, who don't know how to read a note of music, but then there are guys, who are orchestrating and conducting for them. And so the job kind of became a little narrower in terms of what it is that the composer does, because that never used to be the case. It used to be that, that the film composer was somebody who could orchestrate, that could conduct. There are a lot of composers who conduct their own music, like Jerry Goldsmith does. Jerry Goldsmith did. John Williams does. But then there's composers who don't. Danny Elfman doesn't conduct his own music, so that doesn't make him any less a composer.
I understand. So you've seen a lot of talent. You've been around a lot of talent. Your exposure to LA. I guess, I'm a sports guy. I grew up, and that was my life, playing different sports. And I was always like looking for what that unique, what somebody had that nobody else had in terms of what separated them. I guess in your world, when you're looking and you're educating at school and you come across a young composer or whatever, is it a big variety of what makes someone really talented? Or is there, I guess the question is, what makes a really good composer? I guess if it's all of the above, but I guess you'd have to feel it, hear it. You have to have vision. What are the things that you're looking for?
Well, for me, I really put a high value on good melodic writing. And so somebody that can write a strong melody. In the program that I teach, we do assignments on how to create better quality melodic content for their films. The reality is that people don't walk around singing the textures of a film score. If I said Indiana Jones to you, you wouldn't go around singing bum 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 bum. You sing the da 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 da. It's the melodic content that people recognize. And so to me, music without melodic content is very faceless. It doesn't have much identity, and it could be great for a film score. Sometimes a low undulating drone is exactly what the film needs. But I don't think that you're going to sit and listen to a soundtrack album of that. you know. And I think, for me, good film music is great. Great film music is great music that meets all the dramatic and technical requirements of the film. And that doesn't mean that you can't write scores that meet all the technical and dramatic requirements of the film that aren't good music. I think that there are examples of that too. But with the people that I really look up to, John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, Alan Silvestri, and even Danny Elfman. I mean, Danny Elfman's a great melodic composer. So there's a lot of talent out there. But then there's also, people that just do what we call wallpapering a film, which is they can put an undulating drone happening, but it's not really identifiable from some other person's undulating drone.
Yeah. What about Rachel Portman? Do you consider her one of the?
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah,
she's great. Chocolat and stuff. She did some amazing stuff. Benny and June is a great score that she wrote. No, there are some. There's more and more women starting to break in these days, which is great.
Yeah, and the reason I brought her up, I mean, we have we're going to have an audience of all ages, right? Even old people like me. But I guess I wanted to open up the door a little bit and have a conversation about the opportunities. And, sometimes with my guests, I talk about AI and how that might change the industry. But like for somebody that's younger, that's passionate, that has the fire and maybe the skill set, what does the landscape look like for opportunities? I mean, you've referenced the business changing. I don't really know what that changing in terms of how they do things with technology. Mm-hmm. But is it an attractive career right now, or is it a limited career?
I think it's a very attractive career, and the way I could give you a parallel is, if you wanted to become a rock star, not everybody becomes a big rock star. And so, that you're putting all of your skills in that hat. Whereas if you're like a guitarist and you have the capability of playing a bunch of different styles and you become a studio player, you may not become a rock star, but you'll definitely be a working professional. So when we're training students, I mean, I'd like nothing more than all of our student graduates to come out and get a major motion picture. But the chances of that are, not very high. That may happen eventually. And in fact, some of our graduates are getting into higher levels of working in Hollywood. But we want to make sure that they can fill all these secondary functions so that they can actually make a living. I kind of, when I'm talking about this in the classes, I talk about the fact that there's two paths. One path is how to make a living doing this stuff, and the other path is to follow your dream. And if you're good and you're patient and you keep working towards the goal of your dream, those two become the same. So, for instance, I worked as an orchestrator and orchestrated on many, many motion pictures in Hollywood, many TV shows, but I always wanted to be a composer. And eventually, I got to the point where I was thought of as a composer, and that's what my main impression that I hope to make to people is that I'm a composer, and that's what I've done. Some people still think of me as being one of the, a great orchestrator, because I worked on a lot of major motion pictures, City Slickers, Addams Family, A Few Good Men. It's a very big list of top high level pictures. But Robin Hood Men in Tights, Dracula, Dead and Loving It, Year of the Comet, Thomas and the Magic Railroad, The Automat. I mean, I have maybe those pictures were not as big as some of the ones that I worked as an orchestrator, but I'm still considered a composer at this point. And so we want to train people to be able to fulfill both of those roles, that they can make a good living working as an orchestrator, a conductor, an assistant to a composer, an assistant composer that's actually doing writing, versus the guy whose name is up front. I mean, it's not uncommon that you go to the movies and there'll be one person's name in the front of the movie, but then at the end, during the end credits in the back, it says additional composition by, and there's 4 or 5 names. And a lot of that has to do with schedules in Hollywood, that they squeeze the amount of time that somebody gets to work on something. And sometimes, somebody will hire someone who is a specialist in a certain genre of music that they're not that familiar with. So for instance, let's say a big element of the score is jazz big band. Well, not everybody has that capability or knows how to do that, but you can hire orchestrators who do know how to do that, and you can work with them to create the great scores.
Just curious, did you like La La Land?
It's a loaded question.
Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe I shouldn't ask that.
To me, it didn't feel like everybody called it a jazz score, but it wasn't really a jazz score.
Yeah.
That was the only argument that I had against it. I mean, I think that the songs were very lovely and the dance numbers and everything, but it didn't feel like jazz. And
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just was curious because I don't listen to jazz, but I kind of like the music, and I'm like, is this really jazz? And it didn't. Right. I don't know. I didn't feel like it.
Right. Well, I think that's what I didn't like about it.
Okay. All right. So I'm curious. So like, I know it varies, Hummie, as far as a project, but I'm just trying to get my arms around, like, what does it look like from start to finish? Like, I'm curious about timeline, like, and again, I'm sure it can average based on the score that you're working on, like your days, your mornings, your nights. Like, are you the kind of guy that will go all night and get it done in a week, or does this take months? I mean, walk us through like what it looks like behind the scenes to be a composer on a movie score.
Okay, but we're talking about you've already got the gig and now you're actually working on the project. Okay.
Well, let's talk about getting the gig. I guess I'm curious, is that a long dating process, or is that sometimes we want you, we're ready to go next week, or could it take years?
Well, it depends. If it's a director I've worked with before, they sometimes want to get me scheduled into the post-production before they even start shooting the film. Sometimes I'm signed to do a project and the actual project doesn't need my services for a couple of months. Typically composers aren't involved in the beginning unless there's a pre-records or there's production numbers in the show. Like in La La Land, they had to pre-record all of those songs, and then they need special tracks in order to actually shoot them. But typically the post-production is when you're getting involved after they've put together the film and they've got a basic edit of it. The first step for me is to watch the film a number of times and try to suss out how I'm going to put the director's vision into musical terms. And that means the genre of the score. Is it an electronic score? Is it an acoustic score? Is it an ethnic flavored score? Is it a bluegrass score? Is it a rock score? Is it a jazz score? What kind of score is going to reflect the director's vision that he's put into the visuals of the film. So I work on that and then try to present some ideas to the director to see what they respond to, because I feel that my job is creating the score, but I have to do it through the lens of the director. The director has to see that that's working for his vision or her vision of the film. So the first thing that I do is I try to come up with what I call the vocabulary of the score, which is the instrumentation, the type of harmonic language, all of the musical elements of the film. And then once I get an approval of the concept, then the next thing I do is I analyze the film for how many themes are going to be needed and what dramatic variations of the theme. So you might have a character, I'll give a real simple example, who is a politician, and during the day he's out there doing the political speeches and stump speeches and stuff. But at night he feels that he does his job of keeping the city clean by going out and killing mobs, killing people, getting rid of the riffraff. Well, it's the same character, it's the same person, but they're two completely different dramatic contexts to his theme. So I would like to make a theme that works both in the political landscape, but also work as the behind the in the dark killer. So it's the idea of like writing themes that are going to be malleable enough in the style or the genre of the film that I'm talking about, that are going to be malleable enough to be able to work in two different ways. So I did a mini series about P.T. Barnum. It was about the life and times of P.T. Barnum. And as part of my research, I tried to figure out what was going on in music at the time of P.T. Barnum's life. And it turns out that he lived around the same period of time as Stephen Foster, who wrote a lot of, I Dream of Jeannie with the dark brown hair, I think is one of his songs, but it's old American songs. So I did an analysis of what kind of harmony was used, what kind of melodic content was used, and that I incorporated into the score to make the score fit the genre, the time period that they shot in. So it kind of worked in the same time period. And then P.T. Barnum had triumphant days. He had days when he was playful, when he was playing with his kids. He had days where at the end of the movie he passes away. So I had to do all these different dramatic variations of his theme in order to follow his life, his story.
Yeah, I mean, this has blown me away because obviously I knew I was going to be lost a little, like all the stuff that I didn't know, but it's not just sitting down and here's the music. It's really getting into everything and the research and the timing and the era.
Sure.
So, and by the way, you said Foster. Did you say he was a composer?
Yeah, Stephen Foster. Yeah, he was a songwriter.
Okay, there was a movie called Stealing Home. Mark Harmon. I thought Foster was the one who did that. It was an old movie that I loved. Music was amazing, but
don't know.
Okay, so so interesting. So one question, and then I want to get to the one I ask about. Okay, now post-production, you sit down or go home, are you going home to a studio or do you go somewhere away from your home? Like, give me some color around what that looks like when you've done the research and you've gotten buy-off and now you're going to do your thing.
You basically meet with the director and do what's called a spotting session where you decide where the music's going to go and what the music is going to do, So, is the music supposed to make people feel happier? Is it supposed to give more excitement? Is it supposed to make people feel more scared? All of those things, as a film composer, you kind of learn how to musically push buttons to help to help the experience that people are having. Spooky music can make a scene way more spooky, or music with angular music can make people feel very much more at ease. I mean, there's a couple of there's techniques to doing this stuff, and composers are always looking for new ways of doing those things. And then you start working from the beginning. I like to work from the beginning of the movie, go to the end of the movie, working on each individual cue. And the way it's done these days is that, you write the cue, you mock it up electronically so that the director can hear it. It used to be in the good old days, you would just sit down at the piano, play the director the theme, and then meet him at the recording session. In fact, but I think about one of the first films that I did a long time ago, Year of the Comet, where I remember presenting my themes to the director and him turning to me and saying, okay, I got to go to London for 6 weeks. I'll see you at the recording session. And I went, oh my God, I'm being left completely alone to write this score. I'm not going to have to get any approvals or anything. And everybody loved the score, so there was a lot more trust. And I don't want to say that as a negative way. I mean, we didn't have the capability of doing mock-ups the way that we do these days. I mean, everybody has, a studio. You're looking at my studio right behind me. It's shrunk over the last number of years. This is a MIDI-capable piano that controls a secondary computer that has all my sounds on it. I use Digital Performer as my digital audio workstation, so I can mock things up to play for directors. And then you just create a file and send it through the internet, and director can check, can decide if they like it or make comments from wherever they work. That never used to be part of the process when I first started. It became more and more part of the process as technology got better and better. And a lot of composers incorporate electronics into their scores. So they'll have, it basically expands their sound palette. They can have electronic sounds as part of their sound palette, but it also can be used to reinforce an orchestra. So you might have a string section, but you don't think it sounds big enough. You can add electronic samples of strings. So there's a lot more capabilities that's now available than it used to be 30 years ago.
So question, I just want to make sure I'm following you. Like, I love Blade Runner. Like, that's, when you say electronics, is that a movie
that's an electronically realized score?
Okay.
So, and I've done some of those, but my preference is to do acoustic or orchestral scores.
Okay. And then when I finish this and tell my wife about this podcast, when I'm talking about like Cinema Paradiso, The Mission, Dances with Wolves, Rudy. So what is that? Like that's the stuff that I love. How would you phrase that in your world or terminology?
Those are acoustic orchestral scores.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that any of the scores you just listed, there might have been some electronic percussion in Dances with Wolves. But typically, like Rudy was fully acoustic, as far as I know, it's just a live string section, and you really can't. I mean, the thing that's interesting about the what's been going on in the industry is that what is easy to do on electronics really limits what people write for live musicians. So, for instance, writing for strings, really writing for strings doesn't work as well electronically because it's hard to get the nuances that a real string section can get. So people, there's a lot of scores you'll hear that just have string pads or just sustained strings and a lot of percussion, because percussion is easy to do electronically, but busy moving strings. I mean, I challenge my students all the time. The score that I wrote for Robin Hood Men in Tights would be impossible to sell doing mock-ups because it's really hard to mock that stuff up. And by the way, I always challenge musicians about this all the time. It's like, go and take your favorite, Tchaikovsky piece or Mozart or Beethoven piece, mock it up and make it sound as good as the acoustic version. It's almost impossible to do because the way you write for electronics is very different than the way you write for live musicians. And one of the things that happens is that people will get an oboe sound, for instance, but because they're playing it at a keyboard, they're actually playing a keyboard playable part with an oboe sound. And so sometimes they'll write things that are just really awkward on an oboe, but are easy to play because their keyboard is performing it.
By the way, is that the song Gabriel's Oboe in The Mission? Is that actually an oboe or is that I thought that was a flute.
No, that's an actual oboe.
Okay. That's a beautiful.
Tom Boyd was the oboist on that. And
that's amazing.
Great musician.
Oh, it's amazing. I have all the songs I'm going to play for when I pass. I've got it all laid out. I know it's a little morbid, but I tell you, Hummie, I know I'm speaking to the man, but no pun intended, but music and movies makes it for me. Like, I love movies I could watch, but the music can just take it to a level that, I don't know. It's like a language of love or whatever that just speaks to me. So I know we're limited in time. And as we wind this down, I'm really curious. There's, I guess, one question that's coming up in my mind, and I don't know how to phrase it, but I'm curious when I interview people who are creative, versus say just pure like accountants or businessmen or whatever. And I'm sure you are a businessman. The creativity and then having to bend the knee. I guess I'm curious about the politics of your world, because I would assume that you have strong opinions on your music and your art. How often do you encounter situations to where, they want you to do something and you just don't agree? And I don't know, does that happen often, or do you guys seem to work it out?
I've been very fortunate. I haven't had that happen much. I mean, I can't say that I've never been fired off of a film because, but in one case, the director was so madly in love with the temp score that he lived with that nothing was going to make him happier than imitating the temp score. And, so sometimes, directors really do a disservice to their film because they've lived with a temp score for 6 months, and then they bring in the composer and they just say, "I just wanted you to write this sideways." I mean, I think that the quote from that director was, "I don't think that this movie needs any themes because it's working so well without them." Like, he's not realizing how much better it could be with thematic material and with unifying themes. I mean, it's just a lack of understanding of what music can bring to the party. And I've worked with a lot of directors who, basically their favorite part of the whole process is going to the recording session, because then they get to see this thing come to life in a completely different way, And I've considered myself very lucky to have worked with directors like that.
That's great. I am curious, briefly, not to get too personal, but I'm in my mind, I'm wondering what kind of guy Hummie was. Like, were you a kid growing up that loved music? Like, was that your life, or was this did you have a different kind of career and then one day you just woke up and said, "Hey, I'm going to follow my passion"? But like, was this something that was born in high school, college? I mean,
It was way before then. I mean, I started playing guitar, and I think guitar was my third or fourth instrument when I was like 7 years old. And by the time I was 13, I was playing in pit orchestras for musicals and doing my first record. I think I did my first professional recording session at 13 or 14. And, I had always wanted to do music. Of course, my parents were concerned that being a musician wasn't a good living. So I did 1 year of electrical engineering at McGill University. And my father recognized that I was kind of not spending any time doing music where I used to spend a lot of time doing music. And he basically said, well, if you apply to music school and you get in, I'll send you. And I got accepted to Berklee College of Music, which at that time, of being truth be told, was not a difficult school to get into. It was more a difficult school to graduate from. So my incoming class was 1,500 students, and my graduating class was 120. So it was like 10% of what started. So I consider myself very lucky that I got to go to Berklee College of Music, and I was very fortunate to meet people in Los Angeles who were years before me had gone to Berklee, and they were forming their careers, and I started working for them as orchestrators and conducting. Did a lot of orchestration in the early years, and then started working with a variety of composers where I would also conduct their scores.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I'm trying to do, Hummie, is have people kind of look in the mirror and kind of feel like what energizes them, like what are they different from what were they born into this world? And, in listening to you just now, you obviously from a young age kind of knew what it was you wanted to do. And I guess I'm jealous. I think a lot of people struggle, and I think a lot of people kind of go down roads that maybe aren't in alignment with who they really are. So I think that's really great. I'm curious if let's just say you couldn't be a composer, is there a dream job, or are you in it? Like, is there something, let's just say this chapter of your life ended and you had to pick something else? Is there just, and I ask this question because I'm always curious. It might give a little more insight to who you are, and, whether it's a sports broadcaster or a priest or whatever. Is there something else that you could see yourself doing, or are you all in on this?
I'm pretty much all in on this. I mean, I would say that I even from an early age. I mean, even when I was a kid in high school, I was the other part of my life has always been education. I mean, I used to give private guitar lessons when I was at Berklee College of Music. I was earning some money on the side by giving guitar lessons, and currently I'm now I guess for lack of a better term, a professor at the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program, and so I get a lot of joy now out of nurturing and mentoring up and coming students, to see them, and it's very exciting to see them having the success that our students are having. I mean, we're very fortunate that I created a program that has really done a good job of preparing people for the industry. We've gotten feedback from professionals in Hollywood saying that they feel that the graduates of my program are some of the best prepared students of any other graduate programs in the country. So, and a lot of our students are actually making a living either as assistant composers, as orchestrators, as conductors. A couple of our students have been signed to, they have staff senior composer positions at video game companies. People are doing concert works. It's all over the map. And, I don't want to say that this is the easiest career path in the world, but if you have a passion for it, if this is really what you need to do, then there are ways of making it work. And I'm very pleased in the fact that I'm one of the people that's able to help people realize that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you get to create the art, but then you get to help people kind of realize their dream as well. So you get kind of the best of both worlds. On ending, I guess I have two quick questions. One is, I know you've done a lot. I'm curious what you're most proud of as far as a score that you've done, if you had to pick one, and then maybe a favorite film score that's not yours that, on a Saturday night, if you're having a glass of wine, that you might listen to. Is that an easy question to answer?
one of my favorite scores. I wouldn't, I don't know that I could make it just one score, but certainly you actually mentioned it as Cinema Paradiso. I mean, I've worn out that CD probably. If there is such a thing as wearing out CDs, I listened to that constantly when it first came out. I just was blown away by the mastery of Ennio Morricone. As far as the other question. Let me see. I'm trying to think of how to answer it.
Let me say it this way. Maybe I know you've done a variety and a lot of, but one where you ended and you actually not, in a humble way, you're just like, wow. I mean, I'm really proud of myself. That one was really good.
That's like trying to identify your favorite child, being quite honest with you. I think it's pretty difficult. It's always nice when other people recognize you, and I think that has an effect. I mean, one year I got contacted by this guy on Facebook who told me he was using one of my scores to teach in his composition classes. And when I did some research on this guy, I mean, I wrote him back and I said, well, gee, I'm really, thank you. What score? And he said, well, it was the main title from Dracula, Dead and Loving It. And, when I looked up this guy's credentials, he's like a Pulitzer Prize nominated composer. So when somebody of that level, or when Jerry Goldsmith told the agent that we shared that he was really impressed with my work on Robin Hood Men in Tights, when somebody of that stature, somebody who you've considered one of your gods, looks down upon you and says, "You got the goods, kid," that certainly has an effect on how you see things, or winning an Emmy Award for Language of the Heart, things of that sort. I mean, that I don't know that I go into any project going, oh, this isn't going to be much of a score, or this is going to be the score that's going to make my mark. You don't know. I mean, certainly when I was nominated for the Critics' Choice Award for the Automat, that came completely out of left field. I mean, the director was the one that put me in for the nomination, and I was in New York visiting my daughter. And the day that we arrived, the nominations came out, and I get an email saying, "Hey, you got nominated for an award." I went, "Oh my God, what are you kidding me?" So, I like to think that I put out a high level product, and people obviously like my work. I mean, in a couple of weeks, there's going to be a concert here in Seattle by the Seattle Collaborative Orchestra. They're doing an evening of my film music. They're going to perform a whole night of my film scores. So that's very exciting.
That's in a couple weeks?
Yep.
All right. Is it still available, or is it sold?
On May 16th, and it's they can go to the Seattle Collaborative Orchestra website, and it's
right on.
Very exciting night.
Maybe I'll take my wife. That sounds exciting. In ending, is there anything I didn't ask? I mean, the name of the game on this is to educate and fill in the color and kind of the lifestyle. Is there anything that's on the tip of your tongue that I should have asked that you want to say to the audience?
I think that one of the hardest things for all of our graduates and a lot of people is, the difficulty of going out and selling oneself. And we actually cover this in the program, in the master's program that I teach. We give you some, ways of doing it. If you're not an outgoing person, it's going to be a very difficult career path, because you have to be able to go out there and press the flesh with people and meet people, and without being annoying, kind of get an opportunity to get your music in front of them. And that seems to be the thing that holds back people more than their skill set. There's people who are great schmoozers who don't have the skill set that my graduates are doing, and they end up hiring my graduates to help them do their scores. Again, that's just part of the skill set that's unfortunately left out of a lot of educational programs, is how to go out there and sell yourself and make that work. And that's, if you're really a shy person, start working on that now, even before you get yourself into training for film music. It's part of the game. It's for most people, the cold calling and the meetings and stuff are the most uncomfortable parts of the process. But you need to do them, and the sooner you kind of start building that muscle, the better.
I'm really glad I asked that, because that shocks me. I would think that you could be a total introvert if you wanted to be and be very effective. But the fact that you have to be likable and social and sell yourself isn't something that I thought would be really an important part of success. But that's really interesting. You said that.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Hummie. You're really generous. I really love this listening to you, and I'm going to come see you on the 16th. But you were amazing, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Dirk, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, thank you.